Hey there! I would first like to take a moment to compliment you on your excellent video. It really got me riled up. You got me going there with you for a second, and then you turned around and actually explained everything I was going to chew you out for. Very, very well done. I usually don't fall for those things. Very good invocation of Goldwyn's Law. I bet you kick ass on Debate Squad, don't you? Um, but this made me recall a argument that I've developed about the meaning of life. And I basically have this a theory about the meaning of life and the existence or non-existence of God and what that means for you on a day-to-day basis. And I've created a simple step-by-step process to explain to you uh, in a way that you can step-by-step agree with me or disagree with me. And then if you do, please respond and explain to me, because my goal is to understand things, not to be proven right. Um, that will hopefully allow you to understand the universe better. It's a bit complicated at first because the steps do build on each other, so it's a bit abstract at first, but if you watch all the way to the end, it all ties together, like, I don't know, like an intergalactic Saw movie, okay? So, let's start with our premise. Our premise is that we live in a universe with meaning. For this to exist, we have to have some givens. Given 1, we exist. If we do not exist and there's some type of solipsist in the universe, then nothing has any meaning and we've negated our premise. Given 2, God exists. If God does not exist, then it's the same as there not being any universe, and then nothing means anything. Now, this God must be a conscious being, and it doesn't have to be Jewish God, Christian God, Muslim God, Hindu God, Native American God, Scientologist God, any specific God. It just has to be a conscious being, and I'll get to why in a moment. Uh, Given 3, anything we can conceive of this deity being able to do, this deity must be able to do. If we can conceive of something this deity cannot do, then there is a possibility for a more ultimate being, and thus this being is not truly God, but simply something along the lines of a solipsist. For those of you who don't know, a solipsist is the idea that there is one true being in the world, in the universe, and everything else is simply a projection of that being's mind, like a dream. Okay? So, in which case, it's not truly an ultimate being. Not really in control. Now, since we can conceive of rationality, God must be able to be rational, given our third given. Um, if God is capable, but chooses not to use rationality, then everything is meaningless. If God does not have a plan for us, then our existence in and of itself is irrational, and thus God created the universe for irrational reasons. Um, so we must, and if if he created the universe for rational reasons, then nothing means anything. Therefore, we must conclude that God exists, we exist, and God is capable of anything, and God has a plan for us. Otherwise, nothing means everything, and everything is meaningless. Now, there's a complication here. Either A, God chooses the variables of our personality, or they are outside of God's control. Now, the issue here is that if God has a plan, this plan must come to pass, based upon our given that anything we can conceive of God doing, God must be able to do. Because if we can conceive of omnipotence, then God must be omnipotent, because otherwise there's a possibility of more ultimate being. If God is omnipotent, then his plans must come true. So, we can have omnipotence, we can appear that we have omnipotence and free will at the same. God can be omnipotent, we can be free will at the same time. Because God can see the universe laid out in front of him like a giant math algorithm. He sees the variables of your personality, the variables of your situation, the variables of those around you, and the variables of those things outside of your control. Now, where do those variables come from? Either God chooses them, or they're outside of God's control. If they're outside of God's control, then God is not omnipotent, and thus we've negated our premise. God is not God, God does not exist, and thus the universe is meaningless. Or B, so therefore we must conclude, that anything that we do is God's will. If we are capable of doing it, if we actually go through with it, it's God's will. If you rape, if you pillage, if you murder, if you steal, if you illegally steal the office of presidency, if you throw shoes at said president, it doesn't matter what you do. If you actually are able to do it, it must be God's will, because it must be part of his plan. Otherwise, there are things outside of God's control, and God is not God. So, what does this mean for us? Conclusion 2. God's existence is irrelevant because the proper actions for a person are identical with or without his existence. Let me explain that a bit better. Um, if God exists, anything you do is God's will, as I've previously explained, and that's a meaningful universe. Or B, everything is meaningless, in which case we've negated our premise and said that the universe has no meaning. But if the universe has no meaning, our actions are identical. Because if we do it, it's nothing matters anyway. So, we might as well go with our gut, go with our heart, do what our internal volition tells us to do, because it's the best tool you have. If God doesn't exist, then you got it through 1,000,000,000 years of evolution, and every one of your direct ancestors survived long enough to reproduce. Since they did that, you gained the basic knowledge through evolution of removing things that were not productive in instinct. So your volition and your internal instinct are the best tools you have. You could listen to the Bible. You could listen to the Quran. You could listen to the Torah. You could listen to Barney. It doesn't matter. Because ultimately, nobody else besides you has any better idea than you currently do about the universe. So if you stop, think about it, and figure out your own morals, and then go with those morals and follow what you feel is right in your heart, then you're either doing God's will anyway, because there's no free will, or you're using the best possible tools you have. Therefore, God doesn't matter. God could exist, God could not exist, but it's ultimately irrelevant, because the right thing to do is to follow what you feel inside, and what your brain, more importantly, what your brain tells you is right or wrong. Part of this is sometimes listening to people who are more intelligent than you, and ignoring people who are less intelligent than you, and figuring out the difference between one and the other. But, our conclusions. Either God has a meaning for us and a plan for us, and everything is going to his plan and nothing, and you have no free will, or God doesn't exist, in which case you should follow your own mind and your own volition to figure out what is right. And there you have it. The meaning of life, an explanation of God's non-existence or existence, and what that means for you on a practical day-to-day level. I hope this has been helpful. Please respond with videos, comments, anything that you can have that pertains to how I might be wrong. Because as I said before, my goal is not to be proven right, but to have the best outlook on life that I can come up with.